Hello and welcome to our EU election series on individual countries and on regions in the EU. Now, the Republic of Ireland is considered to be one of the most pro-EU member states, and the Eurobarometer poll, which came out this spring, bears that out. 67% of respondents said that the EU conjures up a positive image. But being pro-European doesn't necessarily mean supporting the traditional pro-EU parties in Ireland. Indeed, this election campaign has seen increased support for independent candidates. Now, is that trend related to the big social challenges that Ireland is facing, particularly housing and the cost of living? Well, we're going to explore that with our two MEPs, Chris McManus from Sinn Féin, which has been leading the established parties in the opinion polls. He joins me from Sligo in the Republic of Ireland, and he sits with the group of the left in the European Parliament. Welcome to you, Chris McManus.
Good morning.
And I'm also pleased to welcome Frances Fitzgerald, a member of Fine Gael, which is part of the coalition government in Ireland. She sits with the European People's Party in the European Parliament, and she joins me from Dublin. Welcome to you as well, Frances Fitzgerald. And first question to you: what do you make of this fragmentation of the political scene? We've had this poll from Ireland Thinks and the Journal, which is now saying that nearly a quarter of eligible voters could go for independent candidates. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it is part of a changing landscape in relation to political parties across Europe. We haven't seen it so much in Ireland, but it's definitely developing. Now, I was very pleased with the poll this week that put us on, I think it was 24%, back up 5 points. So there's a lot to play for yet before the European elections, but it is a trend. That's absolutely correct. It is a trend in Ireland, as in elsewhere, that you're seeing this fragmentation of politics. And I think it's a reaction to the very serious issues that we're dealing with, in a sense also of parties. We've been in power for a long time, and there's often a sense of, let's look at alternatives, and then people look at the alternatives, consider them, and we'll then see in the election what people will gather around. And I'd be optimistic enough in relation to the current government doing well in the polls in the European elections. But there's clearly a move to independence.
Let's go into some of those big issues. You touched upon some of them there, and I mentioned housing, of course, in my introduction. Let's take a listen to Niamh Flynn, who was talking to our reporter Clovis Casali about this housing situation, and then we'll get some reaction from Chris McManus on that. Let's listen to her first.
It's stopping everybody from doing the next things in their life. My parents want to maybe downsize and move closer to where their parents live, but they're keeping the accommodation open for us so that we can have somewhere to live. And kind of just even for me, I would like to maybe move in with my partner or do something like that, and that's just not an option really for me. So it kind of, you're trying to balance building a relationship with someone but also living in your parents' house.
So we could hear there, Chris McManus, all the knock-on effects of young people that can't buy a place and the impact on their families, their parents, etc. What's the solution, do you think?
Well, the first thing I have to say is that housing is by far the most dominant issue on the doorsteps when I've been talking to people as I move around along the west coast of Ireland. You nearly feel like that every second or third person is bringing it up, either people who are directly impacted by the lack of affordable or available housing, or their families or family members who want their younger members of their family to be able to look at the possibility of purchasing a home. The first thing we need to recognise is that Francis's party, Fine Gael, have been in government for the last 12 years, and the housing crisis has never been worse. We see house prices and rents at very historic highs and continue to rise. And targets that the government, the centre-right government, have set for social and affordable housing targets they're too low, and they're being missed year on year. And homelessness is at a historic high, and it's rising. And I was lucky enough to be raised in a house where my parents came back from England and they were able to, on a modest income, be able to afford a house. But that's just not possible at this given stage.
Let's go to Francis for some reaction then. So your colleague, Francis, is saying that your targets have been too low. What do you think of that?
Well, we're increasing the targets all the time. And let me just make a number of quick points in relation to housing. We share the issue across Europe of housing demand, but Ireland has a number of particular characteristics. We've had a very strong economy. So we had 100,000 extra people coming into work in the country. We have a good birth rate, unlike many countries across Europe. We've had 106,000 Ukrainians and probably 20,000 asylum seekers. So the numbers are accelerating all of the time. Now, the story you had there, I have to say, is very typical. Parents are worried about children continuing to live with them, and young adults, I should say, and not having an opportunity to move out. How has the government responded? By increasing the money going into housing, by increasing supply. Of course, we had a recession 10 years ago. We had that huge fall, a dramatic change, no house building for a number of years. But the new Taoiseach has set a target of 50,000 houses a year from between 25 and 30, or I should say 250,000 houses during that period. That will make a huge dent in the demand. But the demand is very strong. And for any government to keep up with it is very challenging, as well as the migration issue. But we are absolutely committed to dealing with it, and we are dealing with it.
I was going to get on to migration and get some thoughts from Chris McManus about these protests that we've seen in the last few months in certain locations in Ireland against asylum seekers. I suppose, Chris, with this crisis being what it is about housing, the terrain is very ripe for somebody to say they are taking our houses, that they're taking our resources.
First thing we have to acknowledge is that housing and immigration are, of course, issues that have a correlation. When a population increase occurs and a government fails to manage the issue, it does put pressure on public services, from GP waiting lists to school access, and indeed, as I said, to housing. Look, the first thing is, in Ireland, we do not have a system that is either fair, efficient and enforced. We want to be decent, and we want to aid those and help those who are fleeing war and other humanitarian crises. But the government have lacked any real plan. They've lacked organisation, and there's that sense out there amongst the wider public that there doesn't seem to be anybody competent to be in charge in this area of policy. They've never had from the start a proper, efficient plan. They've just lurched from one episode of chaos to another.
Francis, obviously your thoughts on what Chris just said there, but also what you make of the rise of these populists like Ireland First. I mean, you don't really have a tradition of this sort of thing in recent Irish political history, do you?
Absolutely not. And it is very easy, as we've seen across Europe, to exploit the migration issue. That's not to say there aren't real issues, but we have seen some appalling, actually criminal behaviour, with proposed centres being burnt down. Probably between 12 and 20. I mean, this is appalling, and this requires a criminal, justice response to that. And we will do that. That's the first thing to say. The second is the Irish people have been very generous in relation to our Ukrainian friends who, are facing that appalling Russian aggression. 106,000, mind you, 20,000 have moved elsewhere, maybe some back to Ukraine, some elsewhere in Europe. But we do have an enormous challenge in finding the places for the increasing numbers arriving in Ireland. In a way, what I would say actually, that Ireland is now facing what quite a number of European countries have faced before. This is the biggest challenge we faced in relation to migration. And you also have the UK-Rwanda policy, which in fact is encouraging, you could say, people to come to Ireland via Northern Ireland. So there's quite a number of issues for us to grapple with, including accommodation. And we are, unfortunately, having to use tented accommodation in the short term. But we do not want to see tents springing up around the city, and we will do everything possible to provide service sites with all the facilities that are needed. But it's very challenging, and it has accelerated very quickly in the last few months, and indeed 1 or 2 years. So bigger numbers ever before. And Irish people now, the attitudes are hardening, I have to say. They do want to see more deportations of people, who are not entitled to stay. And that is going to happen. And Fine Gael and the EPP, we're totally committed to the Migration Pact. Look where we are without a European approach.
Okay, let's go to Chris McManus. More deportations. Is that the solution? And if not, what is Sinn Féin proposing then on this crisis?
Well, as I go back to what I say, is what we need to see is a fair, efficient and enforceable system in place, and that's what we need to do. And it needs to be one that speedily addresses the issue of those who are coming in and processing them, so that those who shouldn't be here are returned to their original place of entry. But as I said, we do want to deal with people, but we need to recognise that the government has the capacity to ensure an adequate, good quality supply of accommodation. State agencies should be tasked to provide lists of suitable properties. There needs to be an audit and identifying where there are beds in other parts of the emergency accommodation. And like I said, his decisions on asylum applications must be quicker. And I think that's important. People are frustrated. And the other issue that has been frustrating people is the lack of consultation. People deserve the government to be honest with them, and that hasn't happened to date.
Okay, we'll have to stop there. Of course, we'll see how the Asylum and Migration Pact, which has now finally been approved in the EU member states, how all of that will play out on the ground. But meanwhile, thank you so much to both of you, Chris McManus of Sinn Féin and Francis Fitzgerald of Fine Gael. Thank you so much for your time on this show. And thank you to our viewers for following us on Europe Votes.